Once upon a time, there was a young boy named Jack who stayed overnight at his friend's house. Jack was excited to spend the night at his friend's house, but little did he know that he was in for a terrifying experience. After dinner, Jack and his friend went to their room to watch a movie and play video games as the night wore on. Jack started to feel tired and decided to go to bed. His friend stayed up a little longer to finish his game. As Jack lay in bed, he heard strange noises coming from the hallway. He thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, so he tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. But then he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the darkness of the hallway, he saw a silhouette of a tall figure. It was too dark to see any details, but he could tell that it was human-like. The figure seemed to be moving closer and closer to his room. Jack tried to scream, but his voice was caught in his throat. He felt paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even breathe. The figure continued to move closer until it was right outside his door. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and the figure stepped into the room. Jack could see its face now, and it was twisted into an evil grin. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light that made Jack's heart race with terror. The figure moved closer and closer until it was right next to Jack's bed. He could feel its cold breath on his face as it leaned in closer. Jack tried to scream again, but no sound came out. Just when he thought it was all over, the figure suddenly vanished into thin air. Jack was left alone in the darkness, trembling with fear and confusion. The next morning, Jack told his friend about what had happened. His friend just laughed and said that it was probably just his imagination, but Jack knew what he had seen, and he never forgot the terrifying experience of spending the night in that haunted house. I have a friend named Artem. Our friendship has not faded for many years, so our parents allow us to stay overnight at each other's houses without any problems. One autumn day, during a walk, we decided to spend the night together to record a couple of songs. As agreed, we got permission from our parents. Evening, I'm waiting for my friend. The doorbell rang. Artem was standing on the doorstep. We greeted each other and he came in. Artem went to wash his hands, but he was gone for a long time. I decided to go and see what was happening. I saw that Artem was sitting on the floor, trembling and as white as a sheet. I asked what had happened, but he couldn't answer. I started to examine him and noticed bite marks on his hand. We realized that someone else was in the house. I quickly closed the door and we started to search the house. Suddenly we heard noise from the living room. We approached the door and heard voices. Someone was talking on the phone. I took a baseball bat and Artem took a knife. We opened the door and saw two men who seemed familiar to us. They were wearing masks and holding weapons. We started to fight them. I hit them with the bat and Artem slashed them with the knife, but they were stronger than us, and soon we were both defeated on the floor. They started to search the room and found what they needed: money and jewelry. They left, locking the door behind them. We lay on the floor, breathing painfully. I realized that we should have called the police, but we didn't have a phone. We decided that we needed to get out of the house and ask for help from our neighbors. We got up and started moving towards the door, but then we heard footsteps behind the door. They had come back We knew it was the end, but suddenly we heard the sound of a siren. The police had arrived. They broke down the door and entered the room. We were saved. Later, it turned out that the men who attacked us were members of a gang that was robbing in our area. They were arrested and sentenced to long years of imprisonment. This incident changed our lives. We became more cautious and vigilant. We no longer stayed alone at home and did not walk the streets at night. But we also became stronger and ready to protect ourselves and our loved ones in any situation. Jack and his friend had been planning their weekend sleepover for weeks. They had everything planned out, from the snacks to the movies they were going to watch. They were excited to spend the night together, playing video games and having fun. As the night wore on, they heard a strange noise coming from the basement. At first, they thought it was just mice, but the noise continued throughout the night, and it sounded like something was moving around down there. The boys tried to ignore it and went to bed, but they couldn't sleep because the noise was so loud. Eventually, they decided to investigate and went down to the basement to see what was going on. As they searched around, they stumbled upon a trapdoor that led outside. The trapdoor was old and rusty, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Curiosity got the best of them, and they decided to open it up. To their horror, they found a dark and eerie tunnel that seemed to go on forever. The tunnel was narrow, and they had to walk in a single file. They hesitated for a moment, but eventually decided to explore it. To their horror, they found a dark and eerie tunnel that seemed to go on forever. The tunnel was narrow, and they had to walk in a single file. They hesitated for a moment, but eventually decided to explore it. As they walked further into the tunnel, they noticed strange markings on the walls and heard whispers in the distance. The markings were unfamiliar to them, and it looked like some ancient language. They were curious about the markings, but at the same time they were scared. They stayed up all night, listening to the strange noises coming from the basement. They could hear something moving around down there, and it sounded like it was trying to open the trapdoor. In the morning, they examined the trapdoor more closely and discovered that it had been bolted shut. From the outside, they realized that someone had trapped them in the basement with whatever was down there. They were terrified and didn't know what to do. They spent the rest of the day trying to figure out what to do next. They were too scared to tell anyone what had happened, but they knew that they couldn't just ignore it. They decided to do some research on the strange markings they had seen in the tunnel. After hours of searching, they finally found some information about the markings. It turned out that they were part of an ancient language used by a long-lost civilization. The civilization had been known for their dark and mysterious rituals, and it was rumored that they had practiced human sacrifice. The boys were horrified by what they had learned. They realized that they had stumbled upon something dangerous and that they needed to be careful. They decided to tell their parents what had happened and to call the police. The police investigated the basement and found evidence of someone living down there. They also found a stash of weapons and other dangerous items. It turned out that someone had been using the basement as a hideout, and they had been watching the boys for weeks. Jack and his friend were lucky to have escaped with their lives. They learned a valuable lesson about exploring unknown places and always being cautious. They never forgot what had happened that night, and they made sure to always be aware of their surroundings.